You're probably thinking about this a lot these days, right? Like, does my company really need a CISO?
Definitely a question a lot of business leaders are asking themselves.
A chief information security officer. I mean, it seems like you hear about cyber attacks every other day.
Every day.
Yeah, so you'd think every company would have one by now.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
But that's actually not the case.
No, not at all.
Today, we're going to do a deep dive into this whole CISO question. We're going to look at some industry surveys, get some expert opinion.
We're going to try to cut through all the noise.
Yeah, and help you figure out what makes sense for your company. What's the right move?
It's a really timely topic, especially now, 2024.
Oh, for sure.
Cybersecurity is a huge concern for CEOs right now. Top of mind for a lot of them, I bet.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is even with all this concern, a lot of companies are still hesitant to take the CISO plunge.
Yeah, that's right. We see this a lot. Even though CEOs are worried about cyber attacks, less than half of U.S. companies have a dedicated CISO in place. It's kind of surprising when you think about it.
It is. So we've got this Navisite poll from 2021, and it shows that only 45% of U.S. companies have a CISO.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think there are a couple big factors at play. Company size. Smaller companies, especially those under, say, 200 employees, they probably don't have the resources to justify a full-time CISO.
Right. It makes sense. And honestly, a CISO probably wouldn't be very fulfilled in a role like that.
Right.
It's not like a small company is going to have the same level of complexity or the same kind of risk as a huge corporation.
Exactly.
But what about the cost? Hiring a CISO, building a whole security team, that can't be cheap.
You're hitting on a really important point. The cost is definitely a major factor. We're talking an average salary of $565,000 per year for a CISO.
Whoa, that's a lot.
And that's just for the CISO, right? You also have to consider building out the rest of the security team. That's going to add up quickly.
So for companies that just can't swing those kinds of costs, what are they doing? Are they just like hoping for the best, crossing their fingers?
Well, not necessarily. A lot of companies try to handle cybersecurity by relying on other departments. IT, executive leadership, maybe even the compliance folks.
So basically, they're just adding it to someone's already massive to-do list. Does that ever really work?
Not usually. And you know who often ends up shouldering those responsibilities? The CIO.
Oh, right. The chief information officer.
Exactly. A report from Cybersecurity Ventures found that almost 90% of organizations with a full-time CIO don't have a full-time CISO.
Wow, 90%. That's a lot. But isn't there some potential for conflict there? I mean, a CIO's goals might not always align perfectly with what needs to happen from a security standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. Cameron Smith from Infotech Research Group actually talked about this. He said it can create a lot of friction because security often means adding more checks and balances.
Right.
And that can slow things down. But CIOs, they're often focused on speed.
Agility.
Efficiency.
Yeah.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. You're trying to stay agile. You want to keep innovating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to make sure everything is secure. That sounds stressful.
It definitely can be. And the thing is, without a dedicated CISO, cybersecurity might not get the attention it deserves at the board level.
Makes sense.
Having that direct line to the decision makers.
Especially when there's an emergency, a crisis.
Exactly. That can make all the difference.
I can see that. If you have to go through multiple layers of management to get approval for security actions during a cyber attack, that could be disastrous.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about why some companies don't have a CISO and some of the challenges that come with that approach. But what about those companies that aren't quite ready to bring on a full-time CISO? Or maybe they can't quite justify it yet. What options do they have?
Well, there's one option that's becoming more and more popular. The virtual CISO, sometimes called fractional CSO or CSO as a service.
Okay, virtual CISO as a service. What exactly is that?
It's basically outsourcing your cybersecurity leadership. These virtual CISOs are really experienced security pros who work remotely, often with multiple clients. So they bring that high-level guidance, the strategic expertise.
Gotcha.
But they're not full-time employees.
So it's like having a CISO on demand.
Precisely. We actually spoke with Rob Black, the CEO of Fractional CISO, which is a company that specializes in this, and he explained how it works. They usually pair a virtual CISO with a cybersecurity analyst. So the virtual CISO, they focus on the strategy, creating the cybersecurity roadmap, communicating with the board, that sort of thing. And the analyst handles the day-to-day tasks, like risk assessments,
Right.
policy updates.
That sounds like a pretty practical setup, and I'm guessing it's a lot easier on the budget than hiring a full-time CISO and a whole security team.
Definitely more affordable.
Hmm?
Black said their clients spend, on average, a little over $100,000 a year for that service.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about why some companies don't have a CISO, what they might be doing instead, the good and the bad of those approaches. But let's get down to brass tacks. How can a company know when it's really time to bring on a CISO?
That's where these 9 key indicators come in. Think of them as a checklist. Helps you evaluate your company's specific situation.
Okay, I'm ready. Give me the checklist. What's number one?
All right. First one is pretty straightforward. Are you operating in a highly regulated industry?
Makes sense, like finance or healthcare.
Exactly. They deal with a ton of sensitive data, lots of compliance requirements.
Right.
Vaishnavi Sisla, principal at Riviera Partners,
Mm-hmm.
which is an executive search firm, she emphasized that those industries almost always require a CSO.
Makes sense.
And Rob Black added that dealing with the federal government or being a publicly traded company,
Right.
that also makes having a CISO pretty much essential.
It's not just about the regulations, though, is it? I mean, the whole legal landscape around cyber attacks is changing. Companies are facing a lot more accountability now than they used to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's been a huge shift in how seriously everyone's taking cybersecurity these days. It's not just a tech issue anymore.
No.
It's a legal issue.
Yeah.
A reputational issue.
Definitely.
It's a big deal.
Okay, so highly regulated industry. Check. What's next on the checklist?
If your company's planning an IPO, that's another big one.
Going public?
Yep. And Andreessen Horowitz, the VC firm,
Yeah.
they strongly recommend having a CISO in place before going public.
Yeah.
Because the CISO is going to play a crucial role in making sure you have all the right controls in place.
Right.
The audits, the reporting, all that stuff you need to comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Right.
Which sets all those rules for financial reporting and corporate governance for public companies.
Okay, so if you're thinking about ringing that bell on Wall Street,
Yeah.
better have a CISO by your side. What about companies that have already had a cybersecurity incident? Does that automatically mean they need a CISO?
It's a big wake-up call for sure. Smith from Infotech Research Group.
Yeah.
He said a cyber incident should always trigger a really thorough root cause analysis.
Like a postmortem.
Exactly. Figure out how the incident happened, what went wrong. And a lot of times, what they find is that the company needs a dedicated security leader.
Someone to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Precisely.
Okay, what about those companies that haven't been hit directly but have seen other companies in their industry get breached?
That's actually a sign of a proactive company, in my opinion. Black pointed out that some companies are learning from the mistakes of others. Which is smart, right?
Yeah.
You see a competitor get hit, and it's like, whoa, we don't want to be next.
It's like cybersecurity FOMO, fear of missing out, but in this case, you're missing out on a disaster.
It is a bit like an arms race.
It is. And the threats are evolving so quickly, which brings us to our next indicator.
Okay.
Are you worried about keeping up with the constantly evolving threat landscape?
I mean,
I feel like that's on every company's mind these days.
it should be, right? Black made this point. He said cyber criminals, they're incredibly innovative, always coming up with new attack strategies.
Right.
And they're making bank doing it, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So if a company is not actively trying to stay ahead of the curve, that's a problem. They're putting themselves at risk.
Huge risk.
It's huge.
What does staying ahead of the curve even look like?
I think it's a combination of things.
Okay.
You have to have the right security systems in place.
Of course.
But it's also about the company culture.
Okay.
Having that awareness of security throughout the whole organization.
Mm-hmm.
Employees need to know about the potential threats, right? They need to know how to recognize a phishing attempt, for example.
Those are everywhere these days.
They really are.
Yeah.
And you have to be proactive, monitoring for new threats, updating security protocols, just constantly adapting to the changing landscape.
So it really comes down to like having a dedicated focus on cybersecurity.
Exactly.
Which is what a CSIO is for, right?
That's the idea.
All right, next on the checklist, what have we got?
Company growth. As companies grow,
Mm-hmm.
they expand. More employees, more data, more revenue.
Yeah.
Their cybersecurity needs get more complex.
Of course.
Joe Head from The Blueprint.
Okay.
That's a cybersecurity executive coaching firm.
No.
He was really adamant about this. He said a company's growth should be a big factor when they're deciding whether or not to hire a CISO.
Right. A small startup, they can maybe get by without one.
Right.
They have a handful of employees, a pretty simple IT infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah.
But as soon as they start scaling up,
Wholly different ballgame.
totally. Now, sometimes the pressure to hire a CISO, it comes from the top.
The board of directors.
Interesting. Why would the board be pushing for that?
Well, the board, they're ultimately responsible, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility
Yeah.
to protect the company's assets.
Right.
And these days, data is the company's most valuable asset.
Absolutely.
A data breach, that can be a disaster.
Financially and just from a reputation standpoint.
For sure.
So, yeah, it's in the board's best interest to have a CISO.
Absolutely.
Make sure the company has strong security leadership.
Yeah, and board members, they're often looking at the bigger picture.
Right. They see what's happening in other companies.
They see what happens when things go wrong.
They've got a broader perspective.
Beck actually mentioned this. He said it's usually a board member who really pushes for a CISO,
Makes sense.
especially if they've seen firsthand the consequences of a security breach at another company.
Yeah, they don't want to repeat those mistakes.
Nobody does.
Okay, so we've got pressure from regulators. We have got the evolving threat landscape, the board's fiduciary responsibility. All of this is pointing toward the need for a CISO.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about clients
Yes.
and potential clients, prospects.
So true.
Do you think they play a role in this decision?
Oh, I think they play a huge role.
Okay.
Companies are a lot more aware of cybersecurity risks these days, and they want to know that the companies they work with are taking it seriously.
Right.
If you're trying to close a deal
Yeah,
and the client is worried about your security practices,
that's a problem.
that's a huge red flag.
Definitely.
They might walk away from the deal altogether.
It's all about trust, isn't it?
It really is.
If a company can't demonstrate that they take cybersecurity seriously, their clients aren't going to trust them with their data.
Makes sense.
And losing business because of security concerns, that's not a good look for anybody.
Not at all. Black actually told this story
Okay.
about a company selling IT services, and they were talking to a potential client.
Okay.
Everything was going well, but then the client raised some concerns about their security practices.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they said, look, your security just isn't good enough. We can't work with you unless you fix these problems.
Ouch.
Right. So the company, they had to scramble.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up hiring a CISO directly because of that client feedback.
That's a great example of how client expectations are driving these decisions.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got pressure from regulators, from the board, from clients. What about investors? Do they ever push for a company to hire a CISO?
All the time. Especially venture capitalists and private equity firms.
Okay.
They're really focused on cybersecurity these days.
Makes sense.
Vaishnavi Sisla from Riviera Partners.
Mm-hmm.
She said it's actually really common for them to require a CISO,
Okay.
especially in those later funding rounds, like Series A funding.
Can you explain what Series A funding is, just for those who might not?
Round of investment that a startup gets
Mm-hmm.
usually happens after they've developed their product,
Okay.
and they've shown that there's some demand for it in the market.
They've got some traction.
Exactly. At this stage, investors are looking for companies that have a lot of potential for growth,
Makes sense.
and they want to make sure their investments are protected.
Right.
So cybersecurity is a huge part of that.
So if you're a company that's hoping to get Series A funding, you probably want a CISO just to show investors you're serious about security.
It's a good way to show them you're committed to protecting their investment.
For sure. This brings up something important that Joe had talked about. He said the CISO role, it shouldn't just be about checking a box.
He's right. You can't just hire a CISO to appease investors or to satisfy some compliance requirement.
Right.
You have to be fully committed to cybersecurity.
So what does that look like? How does a company show that they're truly committed to cybersecurity?
It's about creating a culture of security awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about investing in the necessary resources, giving the CISO the authority to actually do their job.
So don't hire a CISO if you're not going to listen to them.
Exactly.
Give them the power to actually make changes.
And let them be involved in those big decisions, the strategic planning.
Right. The CISO should be like a strategic partner.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
They should be involved in all those high-level conversations. They're not just there to fix technical problems.
So deciding whether to hire a CISO, it's not a simple decision. There's a lot to think about. It's not just a matter of like checking off a box.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about making a strategic investment.
In the long-term health and security of the company.
Exactly. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've talked about all those key indicators that suggest it might be time to bring in a CISO.
Yeah.
Regulatory pressures, the evolving threat landscape, expectations from clients and investors.
Mhm.
And we talked about how important it is to view the CISO as a strategic partner.
Absolutely.
But in the end, the decision of whether to hire a CISO, it's really up to each individual company.
It is. Every company's different.
Right. And they need to decide what's best for their own unique situation.
But as you're thinking about it, I want to bring up a question we touched on earlier.
Okay.
Knowing what you now know about cybersecurity, about how much pressure there is on businesses to be secure these days, what's the real cost of not having a CISO?
That's a big question.
It is.
And it's one that every company leader should be asking themselves.
For sure.
Because it's not just about the money.
No, it's not just about the financial hit from a potential data breach.
Right. It's about so much more than that.
It is. Think about the long-term damage. The damage to your reputation, the lost trust from your customers. And then you have the disruption to your operations.
Which can last for months, even years.
It can. All of these things, they're really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
But they can completely destroy a company.
It's like trying to build a house without a foundation. You might be able to get away with it for a little while, but eventually the whole thing's going to collapse.
That's such a good analogy.
Cybersecurity, it's the foundation of a secure business.
It really is.
And you can't cut corners with the foundation.
You can't afford to.
But the good news is there are so many resources out there now
More than ever before.
to help companies deal with this stuff.
Right. Whether you decide to hire a full-time CISO
Yeah.
or go with a virtual CISO
Mm-hmm.
or invest in other security measures, there are experts out there who can help you.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't give up. Reach out. Get help.
There are people out there who have been in your shoes,
Yeah.
and they can offer you guidance.
It's a tough landscape to navigate, for sure.
They can be.
But it's so important.
The key takeaway is that cybersecurity has to be a top priority
Top priority.
for every organization, no matter how big or small.
Couldn't agree more. Well, we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
We've explored the good and the bad of having a CISO,
Mm-hmm.
the different options that are out there, the signs that it might be time to invest in one.
Yeah,
But ultimately, the decision is yours.
it is. And I hope this deep dive has been helpful.
Me too.
I hope it helps you make the right decision for your company.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
My pleasure.
So it really comes down to this, doesn't it? Can you afford to take that risk?
I mean, what's the cost of not having that dedicated focus on cybersecurity?
Yeah, we talked about the financial hit from a breach,
Mm-hmm.
but it's bigger than that.
Oh, it is.
It goes way beyond that.
Exactly. Think about what it does to your company's reputation.
People aren't going to trust you anymore.
They're not, and it can take years to rebuild that trust.
And what about your customers?
Yeah, if they won't feel like their data is safe,
They're going to go somewhere else.
they absolutely will.
Yeah.
And then your operations,
Everything gets disrupted.
it's a mess. And these things, they're hard to put a dollar amount on.
You can't just calculate it.
No, but the impact can be devastating.
For sure.
It can take a company down.
It's like building a house on a shaky foundation.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
You might get away with it for a while,
Yeah.
but eventually it's going to crumble.
It's going to fall apart.
Cybersecurity, it's the foundation of a secure business.
It really is.
You got to get that right.
You can't cut corners on the foundation.
Absolutely not. But there's good news.
Oh, yeah.
There is.
Oh,
There are so many resources out there now to help companies with cybersecurity.
more than ever before.
So if you're thinking about hiring a CISO,
Hmm.
or maybe a virtual CISO,
Right.
or even if you just want to invest in some other security measures, there are people who can help you.
Definitely.
Don't try to do it all yourself.
There are experts out there who can guide you.
People who've been in your shoes.
They've seen it all.
They know what works and they know what doesn't.
It's a complex world out there, cybersecurity,
Oh, yeah.
but you don't have to navigate it alone.
The bottom line is, cybersecurity needs to be a top priority. We hope you found this deep dive insightful and helpful.
And we hope you'll join us again next time.
Until then, stay safe and secure.